So we've got a walk-in cooler here that we noticed there was some issues when we were doing the preventative maintenance. We noticed a flashing sight glass and some other issues I'll show you once I get up there onto the roof. But the evaporator's free of ice. It's got a little bit of lint on it, but other than that, it's okay. So we'll go ahead and jump on the roof and take a look at what we can, or I'll see what I can show you. Came up here on the roof, set up some lights because it's really dark. This is like in a parking structure. Pan back. Look, it's very dark in here. Hard to work. So I set up some lights. The condensing unit was running when I got up here. I'm gonna go ahead, or I went ahead and shut it off so that way I could get all the panels off before it pumped down. So I still haven't even put my gauges on, but there's oil everywhere. This is just condensation, but this is all oil. Oil everywhere in this thing. All over the liquid line. And it's not just spray, it's leaking. It's all over that service valve. Always want to try to catch that stuff before. Probably put the caps back on and do a quick leak check real quick, because I'd already taken these caps off, but probably put them on real quick and do a leak check and see if I can't pinpoint it before I disrupt all the covers and caps and everything. So that valve won't shut off completely and it's leaking out of the receiver. And then it's getting blown by the condenser fan blade all over everything over here because these Schraders aren't leaking. All the rubber O-rings are in everything. Actually, I haven't checked this one. That Schrader's leaking too. Yeah. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and continue on with the diagnosis now. Okay, so the diagnosis we had on this guy was that we might have a weak suction valve in the compressor. So first off, I don't have my temperature clamps on this, but we are flooding back for sure, okay? The box temperature is about 41 degrees. So that TXV is just flooding this thing. We're sweating like crazy. The next thing is that we have high suction pressure, low head pressure. Okay, it's currently 80. So if you just rule of thumb, 30 degrees above ambient, 90, 100, 110. Our liquid saturation temperature should be, 110, somewhere in that range, at least 100. So we should be running around 250, 240 head pressure, okay? Our suction pressure right now should be a lot colder. If you look at that, that's saying our suction or vapor saturation temperature is about 35 degrees. It should be, let's see, if it's 40 degrees in the box, it should be about 30 or 25 degrees vapor saturation temperature. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do, now very, very important that we make sure we're not on this side of the valve. This will only work if we're on this side, and this is a crude way to test what I want to test. We're going to go ahead and pump down the suction side of this guy and see what happens. Okay, so I'm bypassing the pressure control to get it to pull into a vacuum, if it will pull into a vacuum. Copeland actually doesn't recommend that you do this anymore. It used to be on the semi-hermetics you could test a compressor by pumping down the suction valve and you're testing the valve plate. But I'll use this as a secondary diagnosis. So we're about -5, -10-ish. Let's see what happens here. It's not horrible. If that was extremely bad, it would pits right up, but this suction line is getting warm because the discharge gas is bypassing the compressor, so it is leaking by a little bit. Again, you don't want to use this test as a complete diagnosis, okay? But I definitely think there's something going on with the expansion valve also. It's flooding. And I had someone here on Friday and they adjusted the expansion valve and we got no response out of it. So my theory is that expansion valve has been flooding for a while and it's weakening the suction valve in this compressor. Okay, so I pulled my gauges off. So altogether, we've got a weak suction valve in the compressor. We've got an expansion valve that's flooding. We've got a leaking receiver valve that's not repairable. And then also, I noticed over here, when I looked at the defrost, there's only 2 pins in the defrost, and then I'm wondering what the heck, why, and it's really hard to turn. So, we got a bad defrost clock too. This is a situation where more than likely we'll put in a Paragon clock. You know, I've been having some comments in my videos about the Graslin versus the Paragon, and I like them both, but they both have their weaknesses. My personal opinion is I prefer the Graslin clock because you can do multiple defrosts at different times. And you can do, you know, 45-minute defrost in the middle of the night, 15-minute defrost in the middle of the day. With the Paragon, at least the mechanical one, you have to do the same defrost duration all throughout. But these are susceptible to sand and dirt, and it's really sandy up here. As you can see, there's just sand everywhere, dust, whatever, so it'll get gummed up. You actually see a burn mark on that thing too. So we will quote this too. Depending on the price, I might even just quote a condensing unit, because if you look at the big picture, compressor, receiver, time clock, I'll look at the price difference to see how much more it'd be to change the condensing unit. So again, big picture. And then we'll go downstairs and look at the EVAP. Well, actually I already have the information, so we can quote a TXV for that also. Something to think about is when I was all done, I went ahead and put Nylog on all the threads before I put the caps on, and then cleaned the Nylog off. Okay? And if you notice, sight glass is slightly flashing too, but I'm not going to add any more refrigerant right now because of the weak suction valve. It's working at the moment, so we'll quote everything and then let them know. So we're just, you know, again, looking at the big picture here. You know, just because I show a tip, you know, like checking the suction valve by pumping down the suction line on that, doesn't mean that's golden. You can't, like I said, Copeland doesn't recommend doing it that way. That was just a second way for me to check my, to confirm my suspicion by looking at my refrigerant pressures, you know, and then I pumped down the valve and verified that it wouldn't pull down very well, and it leaks back when it does. So you always want to look at more than just one way to diagnose things, because, you know, what happens if this valve is leaking by? Right here. If that valve is leaking by, maybe the pressure could come back into that line. You know, my suspicion was confirmed when I grabbed this suction line and it was getting warm, because that means that the hot discharge gas was bleeding back through the compressor. So you can't always just, you know, run with one thing. You really got to stop and think about your guys' diagnosis here. So I ended up leaving after that last clip. We got the unit operational, or it was working. Submitted a quote and got approvals to do everything. A couple days later, we got a service call. We hadn't completed any of the work yet. We got another service call on their walk-in freezer and their walk-in cooler. And what I found when I got there was they were both going off on high head pressure and thermal overload. You'll see in the clip why. I temporarily went downstairs and went ahead and replaced that expansion valve to get the produce walk-in operating better, to stop that valve from flooding. We still have to get an electrician involved to fix the high temperature issue, of which you'll see in the clip, and we'll go from there. So this is an interesting one. I'm up on top of this little catwalk, whatever you want to call it, with all this equipment. It's 121 and climbing. And none of my fans are running, the cooling fans for this area up here. So these are the disconnects for these fans, and none of them are wired, or none of them have power. So I'm gonna go down to the restaurant and try to find these breakers, see what we can do. Took this panel cover off, and look at this mess. That looks safe. Holy crap. Let me check and see if there's even any power in there, and then we'll go from there. So I've got no power in this mess, and what it looks like, I'm almost wondering if this has ever been hooked up, because this restaurant's only been here for about 3 years, 2 years. And I have a feeling, I've never seen these fans work, but I don't know that I've ever been here in a heat wave like this. But if you look at the wires coming in, those were pulled down because someone yanked on those wires. It almost looks like someone pulled from down at the panel or something with a pulling device and just yanked those things right off of the DIN rail in the back. I don't even know. It looks like I can safely turn them on, but I don't even know. I gotta go try to find this panel, KB. I turned everything off, and then I went to every motor starter and I tripped them all. You can just manually trip them by moving the little T right here. I just, moved it over with my screwdriver on every one, so that way if I do restore power, nothing's gonna turn on until I'm up here. So we'll see. Okay, so I came up under their walk-ins, which is on the other side of that wall that I was working on, and I'm trying to find these conduits coming through the wall. So I know there's a line set there. I found a line set on the roof, and I kind of got a bearing. And then I knew that about 6 to 8 feet this side of that line set is where that electrical box was at. And this is what I found. So this building's operating without those cooling fans. So the service call is that their equipment wasn't working. The walk-in freezer just started working a few minutes ago, and it's slowly coming down to temperature. Well, the problem is that they're going off on high head pressure because it's cooling down now. You know, so earlier in the day today we hit 110, and it probably hit 130, 140 up in that mezzanine. So they got to get an electrician involved in this. This is going to be a big deal. Those fans need to be hooked up ASAP, because that equipment's just falling off the map. So I'm going to do what I can to get their produce walk-in running, because they called about 2 things: a walk-in freezer, which they said is already coming down to temperature, and then a produce walk-in. The produce walk-in's at like 50. So the produce walk-in, I already know we've got a compressor with a weak suction valve, and it's low on refrigerant. So I'm going to see if I can't top it off and get it operating half-ass. Okay, so let's do a little recap. We were here doing a preventative maintenance. We found some issues with their produce walk-in cooler. We went and I had a technician out there. He gave me what he thought was going on, which was a weak suction valve and a bad TXV. I went out for a second opinion just to double check the diagnosis, confirmed that everything was correct, submitted a quote to replace the compressor, all the other parts that we mentioned, the TXV, all that good stuff. A couple days later, they approved the quote, and in the meantime, we got another service call. We found that the system was shutting off on high temperature, thermal overload, and it was going off on high head pressure. Also, their other walk-in freezer was doing the same thing. I found that the temperatures up on that mezzanine were reaching over 120 degrees, and it wasn't even hot. At the time it was hitting 120 degrees on that mezzanine, it was only like 95 degrees outside. That day we actually hit 120 ambient. So imagine up on that mezzanine, it was getting ridiculously hot. They also have a 7.5 ton condensing unit up there for an AC system, and then they have 4 walk-ins and an ice machine condenser. So all that is just pushing heat into that area, and it's just getting trapped. We found that the cooling fans for that mezzanine were never installed. Those cooling fans are basically from the previous tenant 4 years ago. So this restaurant has been running like this for a while. I've just begun doing service work on this. It's only been one summer. I think I did a little bit of work last summer, but we must not have noticed this problem. You know, this is one of those things. So they're going to have to get an electrician involved to fix the cooling fans. And then I'm still going to go back and change the compressor, the defrost clock, the dryer, all that good stuff. I did change the TXV just to get them operational. So the walk-in was working when I left, but I could only imagine if we get another heat wave where we get those high temps, they're going to have some problems. So there we go.